What would you do if you saw a war hero turned away from a meal simply for the way he looked? Imagine the sting of rejection after a lifetime of sacrifice. On a crisp Monday morning in the small town of Oak Ridge, North Carolina, just a few miles from the bustling Fort Grayson Marine Base, a shocking scene unfolded at the quaint Pinewood Diner. The breakfast crowd buzzed with chatter, the aroma of pancakes and coffee filling the air, when 79-year-old Harold Bennett, a Vietnam War veteran, stepped through the door. His faded Marine jacket hung loosely on his frail frame, a testament to years of service and struggle. Yet, the diner's manager barked, "We have standards here. People like you make others lose their appetite." Harold, limping from an old war injury, bowed his head and left without a word. But 10 minutes later, the roar of engines filled the streets. A full Marine battalion had arrived, ready to right this wrong. This is a story of honor, resilience, and the unbreakable bond of those who serve. It's a tale that will stir your love for country, reminding us all to honor the sacrifices of veterans who fought for our freedom. If touching stories of gratitude and brotherhood resonate with you, join us at Daily Narrated Stories as we aim for 1,000 subscribers. Hit that subscribe button and let's celebrate these heroes together. The morning sun filtered through the smudged windows of Pinewood Diner, casting a warm glow across the checkered linoleum floor. The air buzzed with the clatter of forks on plates, the hum of casual chatter, and the rich scent of sizzling bacon wafting from the kitchen. It was a typical Monday breakfast rush in Oak Ridge, a tight-knit town where everyone knew each other's routines. But the rhythm of the morning faltered when Harold Bennett pushed open the door, the bell above jingling softly. At 79, Harold's once imposing frame had shrunk, his shoulders stooped under the weight of time and memory. His faded Marine Corps jacket hung loosely on his wiry frame, the fabric worn thin at the elbows but meticulously clean. The left leg of his pressed trousers dragged slightly with each step, a permanent limp from shrapnel that had lodged deep in his hip during a firefight in 1969. His hands, gnarled and trembling slightly, clutched a weathered cap, his calloused fingers tracing the embroidered insignia he'd earned as a reconnaissance Marine from 1966 to 1973, a symbol of a life he rarely spoke of but never forgot. The hostess, Emily, a 19-year-old with a bright smile and a ponytail that bounced as she moved, glanced up from her station. Her practiced greeting, "Welcome to Pinewood," died on her lips as she took in Harold's appearance. His trousers, though neatly pressed, were frayed at the cuffs, threads dangling like whispers of a harder life. His boots, polished to a desperate shine, bore deep cracks in the leather, each line a testament to years of wear. His face, lined and weathered like an old map, held a quiet dignity, but his eyes, sharp and blue as a winter sky, carried a weight that made Emily pause. She shifted uncomfortably, her gaze darting toward the manager, Victor Hayes, who was already weaving through the tables toward them, his expression darkening with every step. "Is there an issue here?" Victor asked, his voice clipped as he sized up Harold with a glance that lingered too long on the faded jacket. At 48, Victor was a man who prided himself on order. His diner was his kingdom, and he ruled it with a rigid sense of what fit. He adjusted the cuffs of his crisp white shirt, a stark contrast to Harold's threadbare attire. "No issue," Harold replied, his voice low but steady, the kind of calm that comes from surviving things most couldn't imagine. He stood as tall as his aching hip allowed, meeting Victor's gaze without flinching. "Just hoping for some breakfast. Eggs, bacon, and a black coffee, please." His request was simple, almost humble, but it carried the weight of a man who'd earned the right to ask for little and expect it to be given. Victor crossed his arms, his jaw tightening as he leaned in, his voice dropping, but not enough to spare Harold the humiliation of being overheard. "Sir, we have a certain image to maintain here." "Your appearance," he said, gesturing vaguely at Harold's jacket, "the frayed cuffs, the cracked boots, is making our regular customers uncomfortable." The words landed like a slap, sharp and deliberate, and a ripple of tension spread through the diner. At a nearby table, a family of 4 paused mid-bite, their forks hovering over plates of pancakes. An elderly couple in the corner exchanged uneasy glances, their coffee cups forgotten. Harold's expression didn't waver. Decades of military discipline had taught him to hold his ground, even when the ground felt like it was crumbling beneath him. "My money's as good as theirs," he said quietly, his voice steady but laced with a quiet defiance that made Victor's eyes narrow. Victor shook his head, his lips thinning into a hard line. "I'm sorry, but we have rules. There's a burger joint down the road that's better suited for you." The dismissal was cold, final, and it hung in the air like a storm cloud. The diner fell silent for a heartbeat, the weight of Victor's words pressing down on everyone in the room. Some patrons stared at their plates, suddenly engrossed in their food, as if they could erase the moment by ignoring it. Others shifted in their seats, their discomfort palpable, but their voices silent. No one spoke up. No one dared to challenge Victor's authority in his own domain. But in the corner, a young man sat alone, his posture rigid, his jaw clenched. Private First Class Ethan Carter, 23, had been nursing a cup of coffee, but now his hand was on his phone, the camera app already open, recording the scene unfolding before him. Harold nodded once, a subtle movement that spoke volumes of his restraint. He settled his cap back onto his thinning gray hair, the motion deliberate, almost ceremonial, as if he were preparing for a march he'd walked 1,000 times. He turned with a soldier's precision, his limp more pronounced now as the ache in his hip flared with each step, and walked out. The bell above the door jingled again, a soft, mournful sound that seemed to echo the weight of his departure. Inside, the diner erupted into chatter almost immediately, the voices too loud, too forced, as if the patrons were trying to drown out their own guilt. A woman at a nearby table laughed a little too brightly at a joke her husband hadn't told. A man cleared his throat and asked for more coffee, his voice gruff. But the air felt heavy, the kind of heavy that lingers after a wrong has been done and no one has the courage to right it. Ethan Carter, however, was different. Stationed at Fort Grayson with the 3rd Battalion, 9th Marines, Harold's old unit, he sat with the unmistakable posture of Marine, his shoulders squared even in civilian clothes. He'd recognized the insignia on Harold's jacket immediately, a patch he'd studied during training, where stories of the battalion's Vietnam heroes were told with reverence. Ethan's fingers trembled slightly as he attached the video he'd just recorded to a group chat labeled 3rd Battalion, 9th Marines. His message was short, urgent. This just happened at Pinewood Diner. The old Marine is heading west on Pinewood Avenue now. His heart pounded as he hit send, a mix of anger and determination coursing through him. He couldn't shake the image of Harold's face, those sharp blue eyes, the quiet dignity in the face of rejection. Ethan had grown up hearing stories of men like Harold, men who'd walked through hell and come back quieter for it. He wasn't about to let this stand. Harold Bennett never saw himself as a hero. To him, he'd just done his duty, like countless others who'd trudged through the jungles of Vietnam, their boots sinking into the mud, their senses sharp for the snap of a twig or the glint of a sniper's scope. But to those who'd served with him, Harold was a legend, Shadow Scout. They called him for his uncanny ability to sense danger where none seemed to lurk. On March 3rd, 1969, near the Key St. Combat Base, Harold had led a 9-man recon team on a mission to map enemy movements. The air had been thick with humidity, the jungle alive with the buzz of insects and the distant crack of gunfire. Harold suddenly froze mid-step, his hand raised to halt his men. There was nothing visible, no movement, no sound, but a prickle at the back of his neck told him something was wrong. "We're rerouting," he'd whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the jungle. His men, trusting his instincts, followed without question, even as sweat dripped into their eyes and their packs weighed heavy on their shoulders. 20 minutes later, the crack of gunfire erupted exactly where they'd been headed, an ambush that tore through an entire company, leaving bodies scattered in the underbrush. Harold's team, positioned on higher ground, flanked the enemy, guiding survivors to safety through a swamp the North Vietnamese thought impassable. The water was chest-deep, the mud sucking at their boots, but Harold moved with a quiet determination, his eyes scanning the shadows. He took shrapnel in his leg that day, while dragging a wounded corporal to safety, the jagged metal tearing through muscle as he stumbled but refused to fall. Blood soaked his pant leg, mixing with the swamp water, but he kept going, his jaw clenched against the pain. He refused evacuation until every man was out, his voice hoarse as he shouted coordinates into the radio, his hands steady even as his vision blurred. 42 Marines survived because of him, 42 families who didn't have to bury a son, a brother, a father. Harold never spoke of that day, but the limp he carried was a constant reminder, a ghost that whispered in his bones with every step. After his honorable discharge in 1973, Harold turned down offers for officer training, the war having stripped him of any belief in a just world. He'd seen too much, friends blown apart by mines, villages burned to ash, the hollow eyes of men who'd lost more than they could name. The medals he'd earned sat in a drawer, gathering dust, their weight too heavy to wear. He settled in Oak Ridge, near Fort Grayson, where the presence of the base felt like a tether to the life he'd left behind. He lived quietly, taking odd jobs to make ends meet. Custodian at the local school, where the kids called him Mr. B, and he'd slip them extra cookies from the cafeteria. Night watchman at a warehouse, where he'd walk the empty aisles with a flashlight, his limp echoing in the silence. Mechanic at a garage, where his hands, still steady despite their tremble, could coax life from engines others had given up on. His military pension sat untouched in a bank account. Every time the VA called, he'd say, "Others need it more," his voice firm, brooking no argument. He lived in a small apartment above a laundromat, the hum of the machines a constant backdrop to his evenings. His possessions were few: a creaky bed, a worn armchair, a small TV that only got 3 channels, and shelves lined with books on history and poetry, their pages dog-eared and annotated in his careful handwriting. Every Sunday, Harold had one ritual: breakfast at a local diner, where he'd order the same meal, eggs with firm whites and runny yolks, crispy bacon, and coffee so strong it could wake the dead. He'd sit alone, a book open in front of him, savoring the simplicity of the moment. It was a small act of normalcy in a life that had seen too much chaos, a way to reclaim a piece of the world he'd fought for. That morning, as he walked away from Pinewood Diner, the rejection stung more than he'd admit. He'd faced worse. Enemy fire, the loss of brothers, the weight of decisions that meant life or death, but this hurt in a different way. It was the kind of hurt that whispered, "You don't belong here anymore." Ethan Carter, still in the diner, couldn't shake the image of Harold's retreating figure. His coffee had gone cold, but his resolve burned hot. He typed another message to his group chat. "This man saved Marines like us. We can't let this stand." His thumb hovered over the send button, a flicker of doubt crossing his mind. Would anyone care? But then he thought of his grandfather, a Marine who'd told him stories of men like Harold, and he pressed send, his jaw tight with determination. Ethan's message reached Major Laura Mitchell, the battalion commander, within minutes. At 43, Laura was a force of nature, her 20 years of service marked by deployments to Iraq and Syria that had honed her into a leader who balanced steel with heart. Her office at Fort Grayson was a testament to her dedication. Walls lined with commendations, a photo of her unit in the Syrian desert, a small flag her daughter had made for her last deployment. But what defined Laura was her belief that the Marine Corps wasn't just about active duty. It was about honoring those who'd paved the way, the ones who'd carried the torch before passing it on. She'd made it her mission to instill that ethos in her Marines, often sharing stories of the battalion's history during training sessions, her voice steady but passionate as she spoke of men like Harold Bennett. Seeing Ethan's message, accompanied by the video of Harold's rejection, ignited a fire in her. The footage captured Harold's quiet dignity, the way he stood tall despite his limp, the calm in his voice as he said, "My money's as good as theirs," the subtle nod before he walked away. It was the kind of dignity that spoke of battles fought and won, of sacrifices made without expectation of reward. Laura's hands tightened around her phone, her warrior's heart pounding with a primal need to right this wrong. "Where is he now?" she texted Ethan, her fingers swift and sure. Ethan, who had paid his bill and followed Harold at a respectful distance, replied quickly, "Heading to Veterans Park, ma'am. The waitress said he goes there most Sundays." Laura didn't hesitate. She sent a command to her staff: assemble all available personnel in dress uniforms. Transport in 5 minutes. They won't have time to finish their coffee. Across Fort Grayson, Marines on liberty snapped into action. In barracks and off-base apartments, they traded sweatshirts for dress blues, their movements swift and precise. A young sergeant, still bleary-eyed from a late night, pulled on his uniform with a grumble, until he saw the message about Harold, and his grumbling turned to resolve. A corporal who'd been playing video games with his roommate paused the game mid-battle, his hand steady as he fastened his collar. Within 9 minutes, 92 Marines stood ready in the base's motor pool, their dress blues gleaming under the morning sun, their faces set with purpose. Laura addressed them, her voice carrying over the hum of idling engines. A Marine from our battalion, who saved dozens in '69, was just turned away at Pinewood Diner. We're going to show him, in them, what Semper Fi really means. The words were a rallying cry, and the Marines needed no further motivation. Engines roared to life, and the convoy moved out, a line of vehicles cutting through the quiet streets of Oak Ridge with a purpose that turned heads. Harold had walked 4 blocks, his pace slow and measured, the morning air biting at his joints. The chills seeped through his thin jacket, but he barely noticed. He'd felt colder in the jungles of Vietnam, where the rain never stopped and the damp clung to your bones like a second skin. He felt no anger, only a dull disappointment that had long ago become a familiar companion. The world had changed since his days in uniform, and sometimes those changes left men like him behind, relics of a time when honor was a currency that still held value. He paused at a bench in Veterans Park, the wooden slats worn smooth by years of use, and lowered himself onto it with a quiet groan. His hip throbbed, a sharp reminder of the shrapnel that had never been removed, but he ignored it, his hands resting on his knees as he stared at the small memorial in the park center, a statue of a soldier, head bowed, rifle at rest. Harold's mind drifted, unbidden, to a memory of Key San, the smell of gunpowder, the scream of a wounded man, the weight of a body slung over his shoulder as he ran through the swamp, his leg burning with every step. He shook his head, pushing the memory away, but it lingered like a ghost, as it always did. That's when he heard it, a low rumble, steady and growing louder, the kind of sound that becomes part of your DNA when you've served. Military vehicles in formation, their engines a deep, guttural growl that cut through the morning stillness. Harold turned, his stoicism giving way to curiosity, his sharp eyes narrowing as he scanned the street. Down Pinewood Avenue came a sight he hadn't seen since his days in uniform. For Humvees, a transport truck, and several civilian cars, all moving with the precision of a unit on a mission. They stopped in front of the diner he'd just left, their tires crunching on the gravel lot. Harold watched, transfixed, as Marines in dress blues poured out, their movements choreographed with the kind of discipline that only comes from shared purpose and training. They formed a perimeter around the diner, standing at parade rest, their faces unreadable, but their presence undeniable, a wall of blue that spoke louder than any words. Major Laura Mitchell, her rank clear in the gold insignia on her shoulders, stepped forward with Ethan at her side. They entered the diner as the remaining Marines held their positions outside, a silent wall of honor that made the morning feel heavier, more significant. Inside, the brunch crowd fell quiet, the clatter of dishes and hum of conversation dying as Laura approached Victor Hayes. Her presence was commanding, her dress blues immaculate, but it was her voice, calm, steady, with an undercurrent of steel that held the room. "Mr. Hayes, I understand you recently denied service to a Marine," she said, her eyes locked on Victor's. He swallowed hard, his throat bobbing as he tried to muster a defense. "It was a dress code issue," he stammered, his earlier confidence evaporating under the weight of Laura's gaze. "That issue is Staff Sergeant Harold Bennett," Laura cut in, her voice unwavering, "who saved 42 Marines at Key San. The jacket you deemed unfit bears the patch I wear with pride." Victor glanced out the windows at the Marines surrounding his diner, their silent vigil a stark contrast to the bustling normalcy of moments ago. His face paled, and he muttered, "I didn't know." Laura's expression didn't soften, but her tone remained measured. "That's exactly the problem," she said. "You never know the battles someone's fought when they walk through your door." Her words hung in the air, a quiet rebuke that made Victor shrink in his own skin. The patrons, who had been silent spectators to Harold's rejection, now sat frozen, their discomfort palpable. A young mother at a nearby table pulled her son closer, as if shielding him from the weight of the moment. An older man in a flannel shirt stared at his coffee, his hands trembling slightly. Not from age, but from the realization of what he'd witnessed and failed to challenge. Ethan, scanning the park through the diner's windows, spotted Harold sitting on the bench, his cap tilted slightly as he watched the scene unfold. With a subtle hand signal, Ethan dispatched 2 Marines to approach him. They moved with the precision of men who'd trained for moments like this, their steps measured but purposeful. "Staff Sergeant Bennett, Major Mitchell requests your presence, sir," one of them said, his voice respectful but firm. Harold shook his head, his discomfort with attention etched into the lines of his face. "I don't want any trouble," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. The Marine, a young corporal with a scar above his eyebrow, smiled gently. "No trouble, sir. Just breakfast." Harold hesitated, his hands tightening around his cap, but something in the corporal's eyes, respect, not pity, made him nod. He allowed them to escort him back, his limp more pronounced now as the morning's chill settled into his bones. As he neared the diner, the Marines lining the sidewalk snapped to attention in perfect unison, a silent salute that sent a shiver down Harold's spine. For a moment, he was back in Vietnam, standing at attention with his men, the weight of their trust heavy on his shoulders. Inside, the diner had transformed. The center table, usually reserved for larger parties, now held a single setting, steaming coffee in a white mug, a plate ready for Harold's order, and a small placard that read, "Reserved for the man who kept the company alive, so they could come home." The words, written in careful black ink, seemed to glow in the morning light, a quiet testament to a legacy Harold had never claimed for himself. He hesitated at the door, unaccustomed to such reverence, his sharp blue eyes scanning the room as if looking for an escape. The attention made him uneasy. He'd spent decades avoiding the spotlight, content to live in the shadows of his own history. But Laura approached, her movements deliberate, and delivered a crisp salute that pulled Harold back to 1969. He could almost hear the crack of gunfire, the shouts of his men, the thud of his own heartbeat as he carried a wounded Marine through the swamp. "Staff Sergeant Bennett," Laura said, her voice steady but warm, "the 3rd Battalion, 9th Marines request you join us for breakfast. Your table awaits." Harold returned the salute, the motion instinctive despite his age, his hand steady even as his heart raced. "This isn't necessary, Major," he said, his voice soft but firm. "With respect, sir," Laura replied, her eyes meeting his with unwavering sincerity. "It absolutely is." Victor approached, his face flushed with shame, his earlier arrogance replaced by a nervous energy. "Your meal's on the house, sir," he said, his voice trembling slightly. Laura stepped in before Harold could respond. "He'll pay for his meal," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "And we'll wait until he's done." Harold sat, the chair creaking under him, and for the first time that morning, he felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders, not as a burden, but as a quiet honor. The Marines surrounded him, their dress blues a stark contrast to the diner's faded decor, and one by one, they approached, their voices low but earnest. "My dad served at Key San, sir," said a young corporal, his eyes bright with pride. "I studied your recon tactics in training," said another, a sergeant with a voice that trembled with respect. "Your orders to never leave a man behind." They're still taught today, a lieutenant added, her hand brushing the insignia on her uniform as if drawing strength from it. For 20 minutes, not a single Marine sat or ate. They stood at parade rest, a living tribute to a man who'd given more than most could imagine. Harold savored his eggs, the whites firm, the yolks soft, just as he liked them. The bacon was crisp, the coffee strong enough to jolt him awake, but it was the presence of the Marines that filled him with something he hadn't felt in years: belonging. The other customers, who'd been silent during his rejection, now watched in humbled silence. Some left cash on their tables and slipped out, their faces a mix of guilt and respect, their footsteps soft on the linoleum floor. A waitress, Sarah, removed her apron and stood with the Marines, her own father's Marine tattoo visible on her wrist, a small anchor inked in black, a reminder of the legacy she carried. She wiped a tear from her cheek, her hands trembling as she joined the formation, her small act of defiance a quiet echo of the honor unfolding before her. By evening, the story had spread far beyond Oak Ridge, carried by the invisible currents of the internet. A diner patron's video of the Marines standing in formation while Harold ate went viral, racking up millions of views in hours. The footage captured the quiet power of the moment. The Marines' stoic vigil, Harold's weathered hands holding a coffee mug, the placard on the table glowing in the soft light. Local news ran the headline, "Veteran denied service." Then his battalion showed up, the words splashed across screens and newspapers alike. The Marine Corps braced for backlash, their public affairs team ready to manage the fallout. But the public response was overwhelmingly supportive. Comments flooded in, a tidal wave of sentiment that spoke to the heart of the story. This is the America I believe in. Service doesn't end with a discharge. They didn't cause a scene, they made a point. The words resonated, a reminder of the values that still held firm in a fractured world. Pinewood Diner faced a flood of calls. Some in support after Victor issued a public apology, his voice shaking as he read from a prepared statement on the local news. Others canceling reservations, their voices sharp with anger as they vowed never to return. Sarah and 2 other staff members quit, unwilling to work under Victor's management after what they'd witnessed. Sarah, in particular, felt the weight of her decision as she walked out, her apron folded neatly on the counter, her father's tattoo a quiet reminder of why she couldn't stay. The diner, once a cornerstone of Oak Ridge's morning routines, now stood at a crossroads, its future uncertain as the community grappled with the fallout of a single moment. A moment that had exposed the fragility of respect and the power of those who chose to reclaim it. Harold, uneasy with the spotlight, declined interviews at first. When reporters showed up at his door, he said simply, "It wasn't about me. It was about what we stand for." But the community refused to let his story fade. Local veterans began visiting, offering rides, groceries, or just a listening ear, gestures Harold accepted as brotherhood, not charity. Fort Grayson's commanding general invited him to their Veterans Day ceremony in November. After some hesitation, Harold agreed, moved by the idea of inspiring young Marines. At the event, he wore a new dress uniform, his medals gleaming. When he took the podium, his voice wavered. "I never thought I'd be remembered," he said. "But today, I'm standing with family again." The video of his speech amassed 6 million views in days, with one comment, he was denied a meal, but gained a battalion, earning over 120,000 likes. Major Mitchell turned the incident into a training lesson titled, "Honor Moves Silently," teaching that leadership means honoring the past as much as the present. Pinewood Diner changed hands 6 weeks later. The new owner, a retired Marine gunnery sergeant named Tom Ellis, renamed it Bennett's and made Sundays a day for veterans to eat first. 3 months later, Harold, who'd spent decades refusing VA benefits, let Ethan and other young Marines help him file for disability and housing support. "They showed me accepting help isn't weakness when it's from family," he said. Every Sunday, Harold now enjoys his eggs, bacon, and coffee at Bennett's, joined by Marines, active and retired, who share stories and laughter. The corner table always bears a placard, where respect is always served. This story isn't just about a meal. It's about courage, resilience, and the enduring bond of those who serve. It reminds us that honor isn't found in history books, but in the quiet acts of those who stand up for what's right. Take a moment to reflect. How can you honor the veterans in your life? Share your story in the comments, and let's build a community that never forgets their sacrifices. Show your love for country by supporting those who fought for it. If stories like Harold inspire you, don't wait. Subscribe to Daily Narrated Stories now. We're on a mission to share life-changing tales that uplift and unite, but we need your help to reach 1,000 subscribers. Hit that button, comment honor, and share this video today. Time's ticking, and your support matters.